Welcome everyone to today's webinar, and this is one of the webinar series. It's actually the first webinar series organized by the Geography of Sustainability thematic group, and this one is organized by Jonathan Friedrich and Markus Dehn, Marie van der Beek, and myself, and we look at more the global dimension of sustainability transition. Before we started, I want to just give a kind reminder that please be reminded that this video will be recorded and then later on make available on YouTube, on our GeoST YouTube channel. And also please keep your microphone muted. And also, if you have questions to the speakers, please put in the chat and then we will address those after the presentations. And yes, so the intention of this webinar is actually to create some kind of let's say conversation space between GPN, GVC scholars and also the sustainability transition community. We feel that it's a lot of understanding needed, especially in today's turbulent world. And we already, so this whole webinar series is also related to ongoing activities. One is a special issue in ICE on transition pathways, reconfiguring global value chain regimes and governance across scales, that is organized by Jonathan and other colleagues. And there's also a special session at the IST conference this year in Zurich, where the same organizing team, the four of us, is actually going to look at also specific empirical papers on those issues. And we have already run 3 webinar already, and this one is the last one where we look at more the geopolitical and geoeconomic issues and through this GVC GPN lenses, but also what implications this would have actually for sustainability transitions. And we have a group of very wonderful speakers. They are Marie-Claire Brisbois, and then Linus Kalvelage and Ibrahim Abache Uma. And I will be the moderator, of course, of today's webinar. Let me just very briefly introduce our speakers. Marie-Claire is a lecturer at UCL. She moved to UCL very recently, but she used to work in SPRU, and her research mainly look at the political implications of decentralized energy systems and the governance side, and also what energy security issues with regard to, for example, energy transitions. And then we have Linus, who is a postdoc at the University of Cologne, and his research look at the interplay between GPN also and regional development or regional industrial park development in global South context. And I think he will also show some of his work on friendshoring today as well. And then last but not least, we have Ibrahim, who is a PhD candidate at Hong Kong Baptist University. His research will focus more on the Chinese investment along the battery value chain in Africa. He published already 2 very interesting papers, one on Chinese investment on the midstream battery sort of cell manufacturing in Morocco, but also one on the upstream lithium mining activities in Nigeria. So all Chinese investment. So I think these are 3 speakers actually complement each other very well in their specialities. So I'm very much looking forward to their talk. I think without further ado, I will just give the floor to Marie-Claire first, and each of them will get around 10 minutes to share their research and opinions. I will stop sharing, and Marie-Claire, please, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much. Just going to get set up here. Great, yes, thank you again. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is about how geopolitical disruption is affecting transition specifically in the electricity sector, Of the three speakers, you'll probably get more of a specific GPN approach from the next two, but I will make use of the sort of the more relational and systemic perspectives that a GPN approach gives us. Right. So the key, whoops, sorry, just going to try and change my slides. There we go. Looking at geopolitical instability and electricity systems, renewable energy transitions, there is, it's both good and bad. It sort of depends on what your perspective on sustainability is, whether it is solely thinking about climate and environment, or whether you're also interested in aspects of sustainability related to social and democratic equity issues. And so there are a lot of dynamics that are still evolving. And our starting point here is really that energy shocks are, for better or worse, refocusing state priorities around security. This has been happening in lots of countries around the world for a long time, but in sort of Europe and surrounding countries, we saw this with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and then more recently with the US and Israeli attack on Iran. And so it's seeing a move towards renewable energy and renewable energy policies. It's helpful. It also has social and political consequences. And looking at the electricity sector, what I want to talk about is the fact that this is having differential impacts because of the technologies that we now have. So in really well-developed energy systems, we have seen largely centralized resources where you would participate in the energy system mostly by paying your bill. You would get service from generation from centralized assets, so things like gas-fired power plants. We now have solar, and people can have that at a household level. So for the first time, we're seeing much stronger connections between what's happening internationally, globally, what happens at the national level, but then now what's also happening at the household level. So because people can now have, you can have a solar panel on your roof, you can have batteries. In the past, you couldn't really have an oil well in your backyard. You couldn't own your own nuclear power plant. So this is a different situation that we're talking about. And we are seeing, we're seeing different dynamics at state levels and at decentralized household levels that are quite consequential and are quite interconnected. Right. So at a more decentralized level, we're seeing increasing interest and uptake of renewable energy technologies. And a lot of this is driven by political and economic uncertainty. So people are seeking control. We've got some research we're doing right now through the Energy Demand Research Center on the governance of flexible electricity technologies. And as part of that we just asked people, why do you want to have these technologies? And really, a lot of the motivation, in addition to climate, wanting to do their part, but it's really about wanting to have some control. And this introduces really interesting research questions from a sustainability transitions perspective, because there's all sorts of social and political dynamics at play here that interact with the technology. There's a lot of regime resistance. Our institutions are set up to work centrally. The business models are set up to work centrally. And it's driving really sometimes perverse outcomes. So pushes for hydrogen in home heating that don't make sense thermodynamically, they don't make sense economically, but politically, if you think about consolidation of profits and regimes, it does make sense. So there's all sorts of really interesting questions that are coming up here. And this is being exacerbated as we see much more pressure from the geopolitical side. We don't have time to go more into that, but to talk about the centralized state, what we're seeing, as I noted, is much more pressure for renewables because of the security situation. But we also have lots of evidence that too much too fast on the renewable energy front can have consequences for public acceptance, but also can undermine the wider political project of sustainability. So again, we have a project that finished up, some Horizon 2020 work actually, that that found that really unless countries were addressing existing inequalities, unless they were distributing economic benefits from renewable energy generation, and sort of giving more voice to people, then you could see pushback, and we're seeing a rise in political parties that are perhaps less interested in sustainability or actively hostile to sustainability transition. So there is a tension that if we go too fast, then we can undermine the whole project, and we can see, like they've seen in the US, a withdrawal of support for sustainability objectives. But then again, the geopolitical situation right now is also in fact impacting social acceptance. So there is this tension, and again, it's sort of it's not clear where the balance is. So how much the geopolitical situation will ease issues of public acceptance, and where the lines are where people will accept or not accept rapid renewable energy development. And the last thing I want to talk about is something that we've been coming up more and more on our work on security, particularly thinking about energy demand through the Energy Demand Research Center. But basically, there is, as we see shifts in technologies, and you see more household energy technologies being integrated into systems, there's recent EU research talking about how 40% of energy in the EU or electricity might be supplied by households by 2050. And so there are concerns about securitization. So securitization is basically where democratic norms are bypassed in the name of security. Extraordinary measures can be employed in ways that you wouldn't have during peace times. So, for example, we saw this during COVID. We saw it 9/11, where freedoms were restricted, and sort of impositions on private lives. And so there are all sorts of really interesting questions about how, if we're in a situation where electricity is being produced using private household assets, so driven by these larger global conditions, are we going to see sort of securitization of people's energy technologies? All sorts of really interesting questions, quite systemic, things we don't have answers to yet, if anybody's looking for research questions. But basically things that both sustainability transitions and global production network research can help to provide insights into. Yeah, okay. There's so much more to talk about, and there are research projects underlying all of this that I'm happy to talk about more, but otherwise I think I will leave it there and hand it over.
Thanks a lot, Marie-Claire. And next we will have Linux, and also a reminder to the audience, if you have questions, please put in the chat. Linus, could you, share the slides?
Sure. In a second. Nope. Can you see it full screen now?
Great.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, first of all, thank you to the organizers for inviting me to this very timely webinar series. My starting point is that we learned from recent geopolitical crises that while the global economy during the decades of Pax Americana and the Washington Consensus, free trade, was largely driven by the question of at what price essential goods and services could be sourced. Today, a more fundamental question has emerged, whether these goods and services are accessible at all. And this challenge of security of supply has triggered increased state interference in global production networks. And one response that has been discussed, especially in policy circles, is the concept of friendshoring. So friendshoring refers to the strategy by which states seek to relocate global production networks of strategic importance to align countries in order to enhance geoeconomic resilience. And in the next few minutes, I will explore why and how states pursue friendshoring strategies. But I will start from the other end, and I will start with two very good news for the decarbonization of the industry. So the first one is in Namibia. where the high iron Oshivela project has, for the first time ever, demonstrated the industrial scale production of directly reduced iron using green hydrogen. So by successfully processing 80 tons of Australian iron ore, the project shows that green hydrogen can replace coal and coke in heavy industry at scale. And the second one is in Kenya, where the world's first project to use geothermal power for the production of green ammonia and fertilizer has been launched. And this initiative has the potential to significantly reduce carbon emissions across the whole agricultural supply chain. And these are two examples for green transition against the odd, let's say. These two regions are not really known for being particularly innovative, but they nevertheless managed to have a technological breakthrough. And I argue that these developments were indirectly driven by the geopolitical turmoil of recent years, which has led to increased state involvement, provoking the reconfiguration of GPNs, including strategic coupling with unexpected places like Namibia or Kenya. So the story begins here with these price spikes of oil and urea. In this example, this is a reaction to the geopolitical events of the recent warfare against Iran. And we can interpret these spikes in prices as geopolitical premiums. So current geopolitical tensions, not only Iran, but also the ongoing warfare against Ukraine, have led to disruptions that caused price increases. And so this geopolitical premium effectively shrinks the green premium, which is the price difference between fossil and green products. So consequently, for import-dependent states, replacing fossil value chains with green value chains is no longer just an environmental issue, but also a necessity to hedge against geopolitical risk of global fossil supply chains. So we see the emergence of new alliances aiming to accelerate the decarbonization of GPNs between import-dependent global north countries, such as Germany, and global south countries with favorable production conditions under the umbrella of friendshoring, such as Namibia or Kenya. So in our paper in Advances in Economic Geography, we identified three geopolitical imperatives that drive states to friendshore. The first one, reducing risk exposure, that implies that lead firms may be willing to incur short-term losses if the respective suppliers are more resilient, so they're willing to pay a geopolitical premium. And the same holds true for states, which aim to gain supply chain security, and this creates convergence of private capital and state interests. The second one, the weaponization of supply chains, industrial policy, protectionism, sanctions, all this makes use of strategic supply chain choke points of adversaries to harm market expansion or dominance. And the third one, maintaining extraterritorial influence. The multipolar world order, we state, requires new alliances, including with smaller states. So friendshoring does not only occur among already established alliances, but also to nurture new alliances through economic diplomatic efforts. So now the question arises how states enforce friendshoring in GPNs. And a key concept here is that of extraterritorial agency. We analyze in our paper in Journal of Economic Geography in depth how this extraterritorial agency unfolds in the case of German Namibian green hydrogen friendshoring. So first of all, we see a convergence of different policy fields, foreign trade policy, security policy, climate action policy, and together resulting in a decarbonization state project. And this state project is now uses three mechanisms to induce strategic couplings abroad. So first one, asset creation. States can improve the regional asset base of foreign territories, for instance, by financing pilot projects, creating knowledge institutions, or providing infrastructure. The second one is de-risking. This refers to policy de-risking, which aims to reduce investment risks by developing a stable regulatory environment, but also financial de-risking, where public funding is used to drive down private capital costs. And lastly, foreign powers can also create a market pull through a number of policy tools that stimulate investments in favorable production locations, such as Namibia or Kenya. So all these mechanisms have been effective to create an emerging green hydrogen cluster in Namibia. The Kenyan case is quite similar, but I will not go into it now. A well-known project is the 10 billion green hydrogen production facility in the south, but also in central Namibia, and you can see it here on the map. A number of smaller companies have emerged, such as the highly innovative Oshivilla Green Iron project, which I introduced earlier. So taken together, I would say that this story shows how geoeconomic drivers provoke state involvement in GPNs in the form of friendshoring, for example, but there might be other cases. And thus causing ripple effects through global production networks that open green windows of opportunity in Global South regions. And just to conclude, and also linking my contribution to the overarching topic of this webinar series, I think we can clearly see, as highlighted also by other authors, geoeconomics as a driver of green transitions. Geoeconomic imperatives, as I have shown, trigger ripple effects in GPNs, leading to recalibrated GPN dynamics, such as increased state interference, but also, and this I think requires more attention, the firm as a geoeconomic actor responding to a more geoeconomic environment. GPN, in my view, provides a useful framework to move beyond spatial containers in some sustainability transitions analysis and highlight the relational nature of green transitions. And lastly, I think it is necessary to strengthen a Global South view on sustainability transitions. And one way to do so would also to include somehow the literature on green windows of opportunity. Yeah, with this, I would like to end, and I'm looking forward to the next presentation and the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Linus. Very great presentation. And now we'll have Ibrahim.
Okay, thank you. Let me share my screen. Yeah. Can you please confirm if you can see the presentation?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be with you all in this webinar series at the intersection of sustainability transition, GVC, GPN, and how geopolitics or geoeconomics affect that dynamics. My research, let me begin by that briefly. We have, of course, just like we were introduced at the battery GPN, by extension also the GVC of the transition from ICE to EV vehicles, and we have looked at the upstream, midstream, as well as the downstream, and we have borrowed various concepts from sustainability transition, ranging from landscape to give us idea about how to better understand geoeconomics or geopolitical dynamics, as well as the region in the downstream of EV uptake. So against this background, my argument today will be centered on how transition to low carbon economy is unfolding within the context of geoeconomic or geopolitical competition among different actors, and how that has and the implication of that on power and value creation, enhancement and capture dynamics across space. And I will give an empirical example on Africa and how it relates to Chinese investment within these twin transition dynamics. As it is important to note that sustainability transition, especially the socio-technical system, especially that of automobile, or generally in any other socio-technical system, the product or the materiality is being produced by activities or actors in GPN or GVC, and that is very important as that is affected by geopolitics in recent time. So I will borrow on some important concept within the GPN tradition and how that may be important to our understanding of sustainability transition. First is the idea of multi-scalar coordination among different actors, ranging from farm, states, and region, and other sets of actors. That is not just across horizontally, but also vertically within the GPN is also very important. So as we go into vertical and horizontal dynamics of this GPN GVC within the context of sustainability transition and geopolitical disruption, the idea of power becomes very important. Power dynamics between different actors, the middle power, as well as other actors, and how that unfolds in relation to the part-dependent relationship, considering, for instance, in Africa, low-hanging or regions remaining at the bottom of the GPC GPN, and how these new GPNs is contributing to these dynamics. And that brings about the idea of geoeconomic competition and risk-driven restructuring. And that is very important in recent time. We have seen regional conflict, like Linus have mentioned, in the Middle East. We have seen pandemic previously, and how that has really affected global production network, among others. But then these risks and these dynamics have implication on how regions and farms integrate. The idea of strategic coupling, either in a structural or indigenous or functional. But then we saw, as I will discuss later, some form of special strategies that is emerging as a result of that. So we identified 3 forces that we believe is severely affecting GBC GPN within this context. First is the large-scale goal for decarbonization by various actors on one hand, and then on the other hand, the idea of competition between powers across space on control, as well as access to some of the technologies, some of markets, and among all that. And that also brings about the idea of regulatory fragmentation, and that has implication on how supply chain unfolds. As Maria mentioned, the idea of securitization, where actors from certain regions, for instance, foreign entity of concerns, is being filtered. And that brings about the question of how and where and for whom is this transition is possible. So this is also important. At this juncture also, the idea of industrial policy is resurging, especially with different perspectives and different imperatives across space. And then lastly, the idea of strategic mineral competition, who access what kind of mineral for this transition, and to what extent. So by and large, this tells us that risk mitigation as well as de-risking is very cardinal in this context, as well as supply chain resilience to either pandemic, to either geopolitical disruption, either at the global scale or regional scale, is very important. And this also tells us that the idea of strategic alignment, especially friendshoring, is very important in terms of either diplomacy or any other kind of consideration that may be defined. Then what we also saw in our study is the value capture initiatives, especially in the context of our lithium paper in Nigeria. There is this beneficiation policy that was come up at the national level, and that has really become an emerging issue among many other countries in Africa and even elsewhere. So in essence, this collectively brings about the idea of special strategies by firm and state, which in a recent paper is in economic geography term it as exshoring, the umbrella title for all kind of friendshoring or backshoring or reshoring among others, and that is becoming very topical. So diversification and hedging against geopolitical risks, as well as regulatory uncertainty, is an emerging issue within this context. So going further, I will give some empirical example following our recent paper published in Extractive Industry and Society with my co-author and supervisor. At the effects of this, what we looked at is what in the sustainability tradition is socio-technical landscape. Here we look at geopolitical competition as well as the decarbonization imperatives and how that affects the strategy of firms and state in terms of securing critical minerals for this transition. So on the one hand, we look at the home country dynamics here, China, how Chinese firms have been, the dynamics of the competition between Chinese firms and other actors in terms of securing critical minerals, one of which is lithium, we took an as example. And on the other hand, the host country dynamics, considering the antecedents of low value capture in participation in GVC or GPN, come up with a policy of beneficiation, a mandatory local value addition before export of minerals. So the dynamics between these, on the other hand, is the need to hedge or diversify sources for mineral. And then that has been a window of opportunity that has been mentioned by Linus for these host countries to capture value within this context. So in our study, we saw various strategies by this firm, which we don't have much time to go into to discuss. So this is the paper. Then the second empirical case is that of Morocco, which has to do with EV battery production. So also looking at the socio-technical landscape, we look at geo-economic rivalry as well as regulatory concerns, and that we look at how host countries over time can build strategic proximity that will enable that will be an asset that will enable firms to locate. And then we look at this strategic relational proximity in two perspectives, geographic perspective as well as non-geographic in terms of diplomacy and all that. So in terms of geographic, we look at the location of Morocco at the corridor of the Mediterranean Sea, its proximity to MENA, to Africa, Europe, as well as the United States, among others. So we decoded it into this perspective, and that has become very attractive to firms, especially that face filtering in other places. And of course, it is important to mention that Morocco has a relatively matured automobile ecosystem in Africa, largely more than most of the countries in Africa, south of the Sahara, and so on. And then this paper, together with my supervisor, we published in Contemporary Social Science in late last year. So by and large, the argument is that at the intersection of GPC, GPN, as well as geopolitics, there are a lot of interesting concepts that are important in helping us explaining or understanding these dynamics that are unfolding due to geopolitical dynamics at the crossroad of sustainability transition, either to automobile or any other socio-technical system that we are looking at. And I think I have exhausted my time. I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ibrahim, and thank you to all the three great speakers. I think the perspectives complement each other quite well, and I think we will open the floor for questions and remarks. You could either raise your hand or you could just put the question directly in the chat. While we are waiting for questions to come in, maybe I could start with a question from my side, because this webinar series about GP and GVC in conversation with sustainability transitions. Could the three of you also reflect a little bit upon how, like, your research brings to the other side of the table that you want to have conversation with? Like, for example, for Linus and Ibrahim, how does this GPM work contribute to the sustainability transition, and vice versa? I think for Marie-Claire, maybe if possible, what is actually let's say a good unit of analysis, given that geopolitics and the world we are living in today has so many different implications for different, let's say, actors and organizations, but also territories and systems. So I would like to have some reflection on that from you guys. Who would like to start?
You want to go
Linus, would
first,
you like to
Ibrahim?
go first?
Ah. I can go ahead, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that question. I mean, the strength of GPN obviously is to cut through scales and to show interdependencies between dynamics on a global scale, national scale, regional scale. And I think this is something that GPN can bring towards sustainability transition literature. Also a more sensitive approach to power dynamics, for instance. On the other hand, of course, GPN needs to learn also from sustainability transition when it comes to the regional scale, I think. So in GPN, in the GPN world, you are mostly you mostly think about one industry in isolation, and I think it's also important to capture the interdynamics between incumbents and emerging industries, but also other industries that are in the region and that can have an effect. So this very briefly.
Yeah. Actually, it is important to look at that dynamics at a multi-scalar level, at the global level, because that will actually give us the ability to have a glance of the contextual dynamics, as well as the basic principle of global production network is that the real activity happens at the local level. Therefore, it is important to look at across the scale to have a better picture. For instance, in our study in Nigeria, the beneficiation policy is at the national level, but then we have seen some kind of dynamics between firms and subnational government that is unfolding in order for the operation of these lithium mining firms to operationalize in this local context. So in essence, it is interesting to look at it at a multi-scalar level to have a better glance of the unfolding dynamics. Thank you.
Yeah, shall I go?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to say, from my not having used GPN explicitly in my work, I find it really useful. This, as Linus was saying, to cut across scales and to sort of see systemic effects that can sometimes be harder to look at when you're looking at even a multi-systems transition or a transition in a single system. So I think that's quite useful. And from what sustainability transitions has to offer is sort of a body of research on the way that transitions progress, on actors, intermediaries. Sustainability transitions is also quite unique in that it is directional. So the accepted goal is a sustainability transition. It's not just analytical. And I think that's it's a bit of a tension point in terms of academia and just being analytical. But I think it's a bit more honest about why we're all studying what we're doing. So I think that's an interesting thing to think about. The question about unit of analysis, I don't think there is a single answer to this because it depends on what you want to look at. If you want to look at the operation of firms, then it makes sense to look at firms. If you want to look at state interactions, then you look at states. And so having a way to sort of connect those is really important, but what you focus on depends on what you want to know.
Great. Yeah, I think we have actually a question directly related to the issue of scale. So I think Chen Yang mentioned this. So the basically geopolitical dynamics at global scale, and we also have sustainability transition maybe at a more, let's say, national and also subnational level. And then the question is also how to facilitate the dialogues across those different scales. I think this is probably a geographical question. If one of the geographers want to take it up.
I think it's a question for you, Ibrahim.
Yes, but probably for you as well. Yeah, what is your thought, Linus?
Yeah, as I said, I think and also Ibrahim, a more multi-scalar view on sustainability transition is necessary. We see that geopolitical dynamics have effects on regional transitions. What I find interesting also in a more fragmented world economy, we also have regulatory fragmentation. And so there could be different blocks emerging. Let's say some are hindering perhaps sustainability transitions, others are accelerating due to geoeconomic considerations. So yeah, I think it's a hard question to answer, but I will think about it.
If you, I can have a go. I think, yeah, I mean, sustainability transitions is not just looking at the national and local as well. So there is, I mean, there's critique that sort of the landscape level is a black box, but there has been lots of work. So for example, like Johan Scott and Phil Johnson, people looking at war and security dynamics and the ways that things move from just being in the background to being in the foreground and really driving transitions is quite helpful. But yeah, it's a continual challenge across both perspectives, I think, is how in a single paper, a single analysis, do you account for the systemic nature of the problems that we're facing? Because you only have so many words in any given paper, right? So it's hard to fit it all in. But I do think it is a question of setting, in practice, a question of setting your boundaries, acknowledging existing conditions, and trying to do analysis within the frame while acknowledging that there's other stuff happening as well.
We have a question, maybe relates from Kevin Lesker, relates to how can we capture the disruption associated with the transition to circular production networks, for example, in the European context, in the affected regions, especially in the extractive countries. If we say, you know, we have to facilitate this kind of circular economy in the global north context, I don't know, any of you have thought about this issue?
I mean, that I think to a large extent brings into perspective the idea of ESG into the conversation and how this certification will actually ensure the idea of sustainability, ethical standards, and the governance framework. I think it's something to think about, but then the idea of ESG actually comes into perspective in that regard. Yeah.
This is also, I'm smiling at this question because this is something that a lot of my work now focuses on energy demand, and we're doing some work on the security implications of advocating for perspectives that focus on reducing energy demand, and what that might mean for global economies, for localized value chains in other countries. And we've been searching for perspectives or ideas or frameworks that will help us to talk about this. And this is actually how I first engaged with the GPN literature, was thinking that this might be a way to talk about this. But I think there's a lot of work to be done specifically about this issue of how material changes will have global implications for economies. So if we reduce consumption, there are multi-scalar implications that are quite serious in lots of places, and that is a case where transitions need to be done very carefully.
Great. And I just want to mention these remarks by Frank Hales. Said that there's a lot of, let's say, high attendance for our seminar. That means this global dimension is clearly very interesting for a lot of the people from the community. But his question is also whether we should also draw more on the international political economy literature that deals with more like great power rivalries, you know, also the rise of China specifically also, and also now the trade imbalances and issues like that. I wonder whether any of you have comments or, let's say, literature recommendation in that regard. I think this is probably also something we can take into account as organizers for future events, also to take maybe those dimensions more seriously. But I'm just also curious, as the speakers, what's your take on those great power rivalries and really the geopolitical issues? Linus, you want to give it a first try?
Sure, yeah. So definitely, yes. I mean, there's much to learn from other disciplines as well. And I think we can look into political science, international relations. We could also look into international business, right? Where more studies have been done on how reshoring and all that plays out, more on a firm level. So definitely, yes, I think we need to do more reading as geographers.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting, and I think it's really important to look at this scholarly tradition in order to help us better understand this power rivalry that is unfolding almost every day in different form, that is becoming very frequent, as well as the idea of structural and critical geopolitics. I think to some extent that is also important, but then. How can we better account to that, but in a theoretical sense? I think that is really important.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, I can only agree with Frank. And then in terms of there are lots of really good people writing on this. Like Pete Newell is classic, Caroline Kazemko. But there are lots. There are so many looking at different parts of the world as well.
Yeah, I think we also have a couple of questions maybe from the early. So because I mean because of this geopolitical turn, I think this question from Dara Leidens more towards this GPN cloud. So like what those geopolitical turn, like what implications would this have actually for GPN GVC theorizing, like because usually when we talk about GPN, we start with this three elements like power, embeddedness, and whatnot. But do we need to also change or let's say move to GPN 2.0 as well? So like, do you think there's also a need to rethink the way that we theorize about GPN and GVC?
Yes, so I think your recent paper in economic geography speaks very well to that question. And definitely, yeah, we need to rethink our concepts, specifically the market-driven imperatives. And I mean, there has been the first response to the whole geoeconomic turn has been, a lot of research on the role of the state and how it impacts GPNs and also the dynamics. But I think we need to look closer at the firms as a geoeconomic actor, as you also claim. So definitely, this is something we need to rethink. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Linus. Especially the other competitive dynamics of the GPN actually challenged by the unfolding dynamics that needs to be rethought in that sense. I agree with you in that. Yeah.
And very clear, though you are not from this cloud, what do you think? Or let's say, do you think in general also this kind of geopolitical turn, what implication would it actually have for the sustainability transition literature? I mean, if you look at all those frameworks, TIS, MLP, so I think they didn't really start with this kind of geopolitical in mind. So any reflection there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it moves a lot of things out of what would get relegated to being landscape or background conditions into sort of actively in the state of play, shifting regimes, which makes analysis more complicated, but also reflects reality better. In ways that were probably already going on. So I think it will probably, in terms of theory building, I think it will be quite useful for theory building because it will force frameworks to take account of these wider dynamics. There's work to do. They don't completely ignore it, but just they will be forced to do it better.
Yeah. And I'm also want to take up Jonathan's point, because the world is really changing on the daily basis. We as researchers, but I mean, our research usually, lasts for years, or this, not like, should we actually go after those, emerging dynamics and phenomenon all the time? Or like, I think this will also have implications for a lot of the younger researchers coming into the research field, I think so. Should we actually follow what is going on, what is hot on the media, or should we also, let's say, still do what we do, let's say maybe pay some attention to still this, what is going on in the world? I think that might be actually helpful. Like if you could share your thoughts on that, I think especially for the younger researchers, I would say. Want to start?
You want to go first, Maria?
Sure, I can. Yeah, this it's a difficult question because sort of in-depth analysis takes time. It's much easier to study things that have already happened. There is, I think, the need for researchers to be more engaged in research is reflected in the growing in the growth in sort of co-productive or transdisciplinary research, where people try to do research in the present moment and affect what is happening. It's quite a difficult way to do research. It takes time, it takes engagement, it takes interaction with what's going on in the world, which often can complicate the way that we're taught to do research, even from our methods classes. So your research questions may need to change, your methods need to change, being much more open, having to continually go back to think about what theory you're using, what your end goals are. So, but I do think that that's one way that research, it's something that I've done for some projects. It's one way that we're dealing with that. Not everybody wants to do that, and that's completely fine. We still need in-depth analysis of things that are happening that sort of not currently bumping up against what's happening day to day. So I think this is probably, for people, earlier career researchers, this is just some thinking about what sort of research you're comfortable doing, and where you want to get engaged and how you want to frame your research, because there's choices there, and talking to supervisors and mentors about what you think would work best.
Well, I agree with Jonathan. It's really hard to deal with all these events that are happening and to theorize them. And I mean, the basis of all this are also solid empirical case studies. And I mean, not everything is geoeconomics, right? We do not have to all jump on the geoeconomics train, but certainly it gains in importance and makes us rethink established models, concepts that we have. So our concepts are somehow tested by reality, and I think we need to account for that. Yeah, so it's an ongoing challenge, but empirical research is basically one way forward to also ground our concepts and theories.
Yeah. Very great. I think because Frank mentioned this China issue, and I think also with regard to how to understand, this kind of power shift. And sorry for self-promoting, I try not to, but I think this conversation really goes into that direction. But I think the paper we did on Chinese battery producers and how they are becoming suddenly, the dominant player, and how, for example, the EU tried to deal with that and has a lot of geoeconomic and geopolitical sort of measures being implemented. So I just want to briefly mention this paper for those who are also interested on this kind of geopolitical, or let's say geoeconomic side, but with regard to the GPN and GVC dimensions. But I think we also have a very interesting question coming up from Sven about the just transitions. Well, we've discussed, I mean, we did one session on just transition 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. So I think this is how, can you also reflect a little bit upon the potential for continuous new colonialization and political ecology in light of, this kind of work, and how would this actually fit into the whole discussion about the global dimension of sustainability transition. I think we can start with Ibrahim this time.
Oh, great. Yeah, that's really an interesting question. And I think there was a paper that was published this year on geoshoring, bringing about the perspective of distributional as well as procedural justice into the conversation. I think that's an interesting angle to look at, and I think it's a motivating point or angle to better look for that and to account in our studies. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so in a global south context, this is often very relevant. There's always the threat that global north countries replace negative externalities towards the global south and create green sacrifice zones and so on. On the other hand, you have new investments, green investments trickling into global south regions. And of course, there's also the threat associated to negative social, ecological effects. So all this also requires some scrutiny, I think, and obviously one can build upon a rich body of literature there.
Thanks.
Yeah, and that's I do a fair amount of work on just transitions, and I think increasingly my perspective, informed by all the reading and all the evidence, is that unless we focus on a just transition, then we will only ever have a transition, a partial transition, or a transition for some, but it needs to be a global transition if we actually want to do things like address the climate crisis, or address issues of inequality and instability and geopolitical disruption. And so a lot of what we see from resource extraction literature is we are just seeing green colonialism, neocolonialism. We're seeing the same models being applied in different contexts. And so I would just say we need to focus on this as much as the actual transition processes, because it's inherent. And otherwise, yeah, there will be a social stop to transition processes.
Yes. With that, I think we're actually approaching the end of this webinar, but last, let me just bring up the speakers of all this webinar series. I think I just want to thank everybody here on this webinar, but also the past webinars for their contribution to a really interesting and stimulating conversation. And we hope also we somewhat built some ground for the conversation between GP and GVC and the sustainability transition communities. But this will also continue, like I said. We will see maybe some of you at the IST conference later this year, but also we hope to, let's say, see what comes out also from the special issue at ICE. Yes, with that, I think we are done for today. Thank you, everybody, for coming to this webinar, and thank to all the three wonderful speakers. And yes, have a good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.